mind frame. Now, when you actually watch television, you go into an alpha state brainwave pattern. Now, this is technically a hypnotic trance. The brain activity slows, and the subconscious, which, by the way, has no critical analysis, is spoken to directly. This is a one-way conversation with the part of your brain that stores learned behavior. The subconscious stores all our learned actions so that we don't have to consciously think about functions such as walking or breathing. If you've ever been driving and you've been daydreaming and suddenly realised that you're driving down a route to another direction, this is what's happened. Basically, you were not consciously thinking and your subconscious autopilot took over. Your conscious mind will only come into play in the presence of danger or distraction, or when basically you finally realise, oh God, I was supposed to be at work and instead I've driven to my mother's. Right? This is the state that you must be in to implant post-hypnotic suggestions. Studies have shown that watching television actually induces low alpha waves in the human brain, alpha waves being the brain waves between 8 to 12 hertz. In an experiment performed in 1969, Herbert Krugman monitored a test subject through a series of trials that investigated a person's response to watching television. Krugman discovered that in less than 1 minute from the beginning of viewing the television, the test subject's brainwave patterns switched from beta waves associated with active, logical thought and critical analysis to alpha waves. When the subject stopped watching television and began reading a magazine, the brainwaves reverted to beta waves. Now, one thing that this indicates is that most parts of the brain, the parts of the brain responsible for logical thought, tune out whilst watching television. The impact of television viewing on one person's brain state is obviously not enough to conclude that the same consequences apply to everyone. However, research involving many others completed in the years following Krugman's experiment has repeatedly shown that watching television produces brain waves in a low alpha range. Right. Advertisers have actually been aware of this for a long time, and they know how to take advantage of the passive, suggestible brain state of the television viewer. There is no need for an advertiser to use subliminal messages. The brain is already in what could be described as a receptive state. Technically, all an advertiser needs to do is associate their product with something that the viewer will deem as positive. However, we also have, like this, subliminal advertising. Yes?
Excuse me. I've always wondered, I thought that the TV puts you in a hypnotic state.
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of TV now, but I do watch a lot of films on the internet. Does that do the same thing? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I believe it does. It's basically because of the way you sit there. It's partly to do with the flicker rate of the television, but it's basically just because it's a learned action. It's just the fact of sitting down, relaxing, and just watching something. It's just the fact that you've done it so many times that you can do it without thinking. In the same way as like driving and stuff like that, you don't have to think about changing gears anymore. It's not necessarily to do with the technology per se. It's not like the television. There's waves coming out of the television or anything like that. It's purely to do with the fact that you are doing this again and again and again. You can find yourself dropping into a daydream state in all sorts of things. I do it almost daily at work, basically. It helps pass the time. So, you know, but yeah, yes, you can do on the thing. But the thing about the internet is that basically, because often you're searching for things, typing and stuff like that, you've got the active part of your brain. But essentially, watching anything, watching any film, television program, anything like that, does drop you into an alpha state brainwave, basically. So, author and film technician Steve Jacobson summarised how television can actually be used to manipulate and influence the viewer without their knowledge. Subliminal perception is a deliberate process created by communications technicians which you receive and respond to information and instructions without being consciously aware of the instructions. Can everyone see the lady on top of the Coke can? Yeah. Yep. This is a genuine advert, by the way. So is the previous one. The previous one was a Heinz advert. That's a clever one. Rumours of subliminal messages in advertising are plentiful. A partially declassified CIA document dated 17th of January 1958 stated, "It may be that subliminal projection can be utilised in such a way as to feature a visual suggestion such as obey." Author and activist Martin A. Lee, in an interview printed in the February 1980 issue of the High Times magazine, quoted an anonymous CIA agent as saying, "Some thought was given to whether or not we could affect political outcomes by using subliminal perception on TV and radio." Can everyone see the writing on the side of the can? If you can't see it, it says sex. Now, despite public opinion that the concept of subliminal advertising is a myth, several studies have shown that the effective nature of the technique when employed correctly. University College, this was published in Science Daily in 2007. University College London researchers have found that the first physiological evidence that invisible subliminal images do attract the brain's attention on a subconscious level. The wider implication for the study, published in Current Biology, is that techniques such as subliminal advertising, now banned in the UK but still legal in the US, certainly do leave their mark on the brain. Using MRI scans, the study looked at whether an image you aren't aware of, but one that reaches the retina, has an impact on the brain's activity in the primary visual cortex. Subjects' brains did respond to the object even when they were not conscious of having seen it. Now, Dr. Barami of the UCL Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience and the UCL Department of Psychology said, "What's interesting here is that your brain does log things that you aren't even aware of and can't ever become aware of. We show that there is a brain response in the primary visual cortex to subliminal images that attract our attention, without us having the impression of having seen anything. These findings point to the sort of impact that subliminal advertising may have on the brain. What our study doesn't address is whether this would then influence you to go out and buy a product, but I believe it is likely that subliminal advertising may affect our decisions." Now, a year later, the following article was published in the same magazine. Although the idea that instrumental learning can occur subconsciously has been around for nearly a century, it has not been unequivocally demonstrated. Now, a new study published by Cell Press in the August 28th issue of the journal Neuron used sophisticated perception masking, computational modelling and neuroimaging to show that instrumental learning can occur in the human brain without conscious processing of the contextual clues. This is another one. This was in the ice cube down here. I missed that one. The researchers collected scans of the brain using functional magnetic resonance imaging to investigate the specific brain circuitry that is linked to subliminal instrumental conditioning. The ventral striatum responded to subliminal cues and to visible outcomes in a manner that closely approximates our computational algorithm, expressing reward, expected values, and prediction errors. We conclude that even without conscious processing of contextual clues, our brain can learn their reward value and use them to provide bias on decision making. Now, the two studies there prove that in controlled experiments the effectiveness of subliminal influence in manipulating unaware subjects, and this has happened many times. It was proven that images of protesters holding placards saying "keep abortion legal" were inserted into repeat showings of the television program Batman, which was broadcast in 1994 and Channel 11 in Italy. In 1997, over 700 children in Japan were hospitalized with convulsions due to the Pokemon cartoon, which had induced photosensitive epilepsy-type seizures. Doctors at the time reported that the effects of the TV program were very similar to that of high-level hypnosis. Now, although some sources claim that subliminal advertising is ineffective or even an urban myth, the documented use of the technique in mass media proves that some unknown source within the industry believes in its powers. In 2000, an unidentified person or persons inserted the word "rats" into a political campaign television advertisement, and this advertisement had a pro-George Bush and an anti-Al Gore message. Now, the subliminal message is clearly evident when you actually the footage is slowed down. Now, recent studies have actually proven that the effectiveness of subliminals is heightened when the message is negative. A team from University College London, funded by the Wellcome Trust, found that subliminal perception was particularly good at instilling negative thoughts. There has been much speculation about whether people can process emotional information unconsciously, for example, pictures, faces and words. We have shown that people can perceive the emotional value of subliminal messages and have demonstrated conclusively that people are much more attuned to negative words. Now, some of you might know a bit about subliminal advertising, and basically it was the first sort of case of it was a guy called James Vickery, and this was done in 1957. And apparently what he did was he put a single frame into a film. One said drink Coca-Cola, one said eat popcorn, and it was reported to be an astounding success. There was something like 58% more Coke sales and 20% more sales of popcorn. Later, it was discovered that, or it was revealed or explained to the public that his experiment was actually a hoax, and so it was basically disregarded. However, recently, experiments at Harvard have been showing that subliminal messages can actually affect behaviour in exactly this manner. A Harvard study from 1999 employed a similar method to Vickery's. Subjects played a computer game in which a series of words flashed before them for a few thousandths of a second. One set of subjects got positive words like wise, astute and accomplished, and the others got sets of words like senile, despondent, dependent and diseased. The subjects were then told to complete the task in the game and then leave the room as quickly as possible. Now, despite the fact that these words flashed far too quickly to be consciously perceived, those who received positive words exited the room significantly faster than those who got the negative words. Those who received the negative words struggled to motivate themselves to complete the simple task. Now, subliminal advertising is not actually always necessary, as public opinion can actually be manipulated with a simple headline of a newspaper. Now, in the recent bizarre death of Gareth Williams, as a young man who just so happened to work for MI6, we saw some very strange and lurid newspaper headlines concerning the manner in which he was found. And these included, "Did spy die in S&M game?" "Murdered spook was a cross-dresser." "Suitcase death spy was not gay." And "Police find no evidence that MI6 agent was gay." Now, it doesn't matter that the headline actually merely raises questions about the agent, or in some cases actually refutes accusations. The idea has been planted. Now, the outrageous implication made by the media in this particular case is that homosexuals or transvestites are more likely to be involved in lurid and dangerous sex acts, and therefore his death is more explainable. The details of the case are actually lost in the sensational elements and the sleazy speculation, and then 2 months later, when somebody mentions a young MI6 agent murdered and stuffed naked into a sports bag, you might well say, "Oh, that guy, the S&M guy, wasn't he gay and a cross-dresser?" And this is perfectly natural, but we do this rather than look at the troubling details of the case. Now, this is due to a phenomenon known as source amnesia. For example, we all know what a rose is, I'm sure, but you probably don't remember exactly where you were or when it was or how you actually learned that specific fact. The brain has limited capabilities when it comes to immediate recall of facts, and so to cope with these limitations, it only stores the important points, so in this case, give roses on Valentine's Day. But it hides the inconsequential context, such as when and where you learned this, in the deeper recesses of the mind. Now, because of this, the negative words in the headline are reinforced, even if the headline we read was specifically about the rumour being true. Now, you may have seen this is employed heavily during elections. For example, denial of a rumour only serves to keep it in the press and the public consciousness for longer, so the mudslinging comes from all angles. If enough mud is thrown, some of it will eventually stick. TV and films present a codified and a constructed version of reality presented to us as a true depiction of the real world. When we're watching a film, we know that Arnold Schwarzenegger is not really killing all those people. We know that Jodie Foster is not really being raped across that pool table. But we're savvy enough to decode this. We can suspend our disbelief enough to empathise with the emotions of the characters, and we've learnt to deconstruct and accept these symbolic representations. This is the manufacture of consent. Now, just to highlight this, just to give you an example, in the BBC soap opera EastEnders, characters always solve their depression and their stress with a glass of neat vodka, to the point where this action can actually be decoded as a sign that the character is in distress. For example, if an episode starts and Peggy comes running down the stairs, immediately bangs back a double vodka, we know, oh, something's up with Peggy, you know, this is it. And this becomes absorbed into the cultural lexicon, so to speak. At the same time, it reinforces and it teaches us week in and week out that this action is a completely legitimate response to a stress situation. Therefore, if you are feeling pressured, a learnt response could be to alleviate the symptoms with the accepted cure, alcohol. Now in the Ridley Scott extravaganza Gladiator, hopefully you've all seen it, in the opening scene we're confronted with two snarling, swarthy armies set to do battle. Now we understand immediately that the Romans in this case are the good guys. Now this is due to several Hollywood conventions. Now firstly and most obviously, the star of the film, Russell Crowe, is on the side of the Romans, so we can assume that at least we can trust him. Now if you go back and watch that, you notice that the barbarians are all a bit grubby and a bit swarthy and a bit dirty, so that is another Hollywood convention. The clean person is usually the good guy. And the final convention, which might sound silly, but the Romans have got a dog with them. Now this might sound trite, this might sound really, really silly, but if you go back and observe the number of films that actually attach an animal to a hero, the concept being that if the dog trusts him, then we as the viewer, we can also trust them. And this is shown again and again. In the 80s cop buddy shoot 'em up Lethal Weapon, we are assured that the clearly insane character played by Mel Gibson must at heart be a gentle soul as his dog consoles him. Now dogs always seem to know who are the bad guy in films, and thankfully they will alert you by barking at them. Now this convention, it doesn't work for cats, I'm afraid. Kittens, yes. Cats, no. Cats are for evil geniuses. They're for witches and they're for lonely people, according to Hollywood. Now, early westerns actually used a far simpler denotation of roles. Simply, the bad guy wore black. What you may notice as well is that the hero also moved from left to right across the screen. Now, this was actually more a practicality. So as he's moving from left to right, you can actually see the gun in his right hand. But the convention stuck, so in westerns and in all action films really, you'll find that good guys travel from left to right. Now we might not consciously realise this, but this subconscious understanding of the convention allows us to make snap judgments of the nature of the characters presented to us on the television screen. Now television and movies are in this way used to reinforce the concept of normalcy. We can decode representations of characters through the signifiers shown on the screen. A basic example of this is if you see a close-up of somebody's eyes and they're all a bit shifty, or if they're a bit dishevelled, they're probably a bad guy or a villain. If computer geeks, scientists, outsiders and intelligent characters all wear glasses. For some reason, action heroes very rarely have visual impairments. However, there is one film that is slightly different to this. In Tango and Cash, Sylvester Stallone's character actually wears glasses and he still manages to kill his fair share. However, we're also informed that the character is super intelligent and therefore you get spectacles with your action spectacle. Cultivation theory is a social experiment named after the results of a series of tests conducted at the University of Pennsylvania which sought to examine the long-term effects of watching television. The theory was actually developed by sociologists George Gerbner and Larry Gross. Gerbner and Gross preceded their study by arguing that, in their opinion, television had replaced religion as the basic medium of gaining understanding of the world. This was now where we got our representations of what is considered right and wrong. And they said, television is the source of the most broadly shared images and messages in history. Television cultivates from infancy the very predispositions and preferences that used to be acquired from other primary sources. The repetitive pattern of television's mass-produced messages and images form the mainstream of a common symbolic environment. Cultivation theory states that exposure to television over time subtly cultivates viewers' perceptions of the real world. Gerbner and Gross noted that television is a medium of the socialization of most people into the standardized roles and behaviors. Its function, in a word, is enculturation. The way that reality is presented on the television screen is often interpreted and accepted by the cultivated viewer as a true representation of the real world. For example, the more an event is shown in the television, the more significance is placed on this event in the real world by the cultivated viewer. Due to the fact that a large portion of televisual fare depicts violence, drama, crime and dour events, the more often the viewer watches, the more passive and frightened they become. Gerbner termed this mean world syndrome, due to the fact that heavy viewers of television genuinely believe the world to be a far more terrifying place than it actually is. Gerbner discovered that the more a subject viewed the television, the more likely they were to overestimate the levels of danger present in society. The results of his experimentation showed that heavy viewers held far more paranoid and threatened attitudes than light viewers. The paranoia was shown in a heightened belief in rising levels of crime, the belief that themselves would probably become a victim of violent attack, and an exaggerated estimation of the negative aspects of the areas of the city in which they lived. Cultivation theory shows that those who spend more time watching television are more likely to perceive the real world in ways that reflect the most common and recurrent messages presented in the stylized television world. In a 1968 study, Gerbner found that heavy viewers held beliefs and opinions similar to those portrayed on television, as opposed to the true representation of these facts as held by the real world. This serves to highlight the effect that the popular media can have on our perceptions of reality. But this technique is nothing new. As researcher Alan Watt, who has a website, Cutting Through the Matrix, which is excellent, he stated, "High drama with emotion plus crisis situation in a movie and drama is a tremendous method of getting points across. It's almost like coupling an idea with the drama, and it's downloaded like a virus into your subconscious, and you're being programmed. This is called predictive programming." The technique is ancient, and it's an old science. Plato, in his Republic, talks about the culture industry of his own day and how it was essential not only for maintaining control over the public by the elite, but then they had to control everything that was given to the people. In other words, anything that the public saw in drama on stage was authorized by the state. Not only was it authorized, in ancient Greece, travelling troops of players would come into the cities and do their rounds, and it was compulsory to attend. Everyone, even the slaves, had to attend at least one performance, because just like today, they had their agenda and their schedule and the upgrading of the system, and it was done primarily through fiction. Because the old saying is, monkey see, monkey do, and we, as an audience, emulate what we see, especially when it's done in a typical hero and heroine fashion. The male will project himself into the hero's part and identify with the hero character, and the female will look towards the heroine. This is an ancient, ancient science. Jacques Ellul, who's a French philosopher, a sociologist and a lawyer, postulated in his work, The Technological Society, he said, "The emergence of the mass media, which makes possible the use of propaganda techniques on a societal scale. The orchestration of press, radio and television to create a continuous, lasting and total environment renders the influence of propaganda virtually unnoticed, precisely because it creates a constant environment. Mass media provides the essential link between the individual and the demands of the technological society." And this can be shown, for example, if I was just to ask somebody to portray a gunshot victim, like, what you'll likely do is do the Hollywood, all this sort of stuff, okay? If you've been on WikiLeaks, if you've seen anything, that's not what happens when people get shot. It's far less cinematic than it is in the films. It's sickening and it's sudden. It's not balletic in any sense of the imagination. Also, another example is, can anyone just make the sound of a frog, please? Yes, right, okay, that's not actually the sound of a frog. That's just going to sound weird, but that ribbit ribbit sound is the sound of a California tree frog. What happened was essentially that was the closest frog sound to Hollywood. So this was recorded and put on as a stock sound effect. This stock sound effect was then sent around the world and showed again in hundreds of thousands of films, television programs, radio plays. So we basically absorb it back into the public that frogs go ribbit ribbit. There's dozens and dozens of pitches, tones, there's hundreds of different types of species of frog. There is basically no all-encompassing frog sound. Now, aside from this, we also have a continuing reinforcement in the media that now is the best time that's ever been. And this is basically the zenith of civilization. And this is shown in programs like Remember the 90s, 10 Things I Hate About 1987, Shameful Secrets of the 80s, for example. And these shows basically show how naive we used to be, how silly we used to be, and how savvy and culturally intelligent we are now. And this basically shows the public that conspiracies cannot be occurring, as we are far too clever to be fooled. They are too informed, they're too media savvy, and they have far too much access to too many outlets to be misinformed. They're cosmopolitan and aware, after all. They watch the news and they read a broad selection of newspapers. Now, this obvious buttering up leaves the public in a smug, self-satisfied state, unprepared to admit that in reality things are actually pretty bad. Now, this gentleman is David Rockefeller. Now, David Rockefeller presented an explanation as to how this is possible in a speech to the Trilateral Commission in June 1991. He said, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now far more sophisticated and prepared to march toward world government. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodeterminism practiced in past centuries." Cheers.
I think that was the Bilderberg Conference of 91, not the Trilateral.
Was it? Oh.
I think so.
You may well be correct. But yeah, you know, his elitist his elitist ideals are clear, and the fact of the collusion with the very top levels of media is also clear. Now, this is actually helped as well by an increasingly narrow number of outlets for the promulgation of news. The number of corporations owning the majority of US media outlets was reduced from 50 to 5 in less than 20 years. And this is shown in Ben Bagdican's book, The Media Monopoly. He says in 1983, 50 corporations dominated most of every mass medium, and the biggest media merger in history was a $340 million deal. Time Warner, in 2000, AOL Time Warner's $350 billion deal merged a corporation that was more than 1,000 times larger than the biggest deal of 1983. Now, today there are actually 6 media giants that control the vast majority of American news and entertainment at both the local and the national level. The companies are Time Warner, Walt Disney, Viacom, News Corporation, CBS Corporation and NBC International. Sony Corporation, Bertelsmann and Vivendi also control a large portion of media outlets and a large percentage of the world market. The listed companies own and control hundreds of television and radio channels, television shows, production companies, as well as the vast majority of print media and record labels. A list of the properties controlled by AOL Time Warner takes 10 type pages and lists 292 separate companies and subsidiaries. Of these, 22 are joint ventures with other major corporations involved in varying degrees with media operations. These partners include 3Com, eBay, Hewlett-Packard, Citigroup, Ticketmaster, American Express, Homestore, Sony, Viva, Bertelsmann, Polygram, Amazon.com, Book of the Month Club, Little, Brown Publishers, HBO, CNN, Roadrunner, Warner Brothers Studio, Weight Watchers, Popular Science, and 52 major record labels. Now, within this sphere, there is also the scenario of self-censorship by journalists. John Swinton, a highly respected American journalist, famously toasted the New York Press Club in 1953 with this revealing diatribe. He said there is no such thing, by the way, he waited until he'd quit before he decided to actually say this. He said there is no such thing as this date of the world's history in America as an independent press. You know it and I know it. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinion out of the paper I am connected with.